United States Army soldiers advanced toward Japanese positions past the body of a dead American soldier in the Philippines on January 30, 1945. The photograph documents combat advancement and casualty cost. It records frontline warfare during the Pacific Campaign. Antonio Rivera looks at his lawyer at a hearing in 1975 after he and ex-wife Merla Walpole were accused of murder. Their daughter disappeared at age 3 in 1965. 9 months after arrest, their daughter was found alive and adopted. Ari is photographed in Milan in February 2023 in a contemporary urban setting. The image captures modern city life and street photography. It documents present-day European urban environments. Musicians and a dog pose on a sunny day on State Street in Santa Barbara, California in 1886. The photograph captures street performance culture and leisure. It documents late 19th century entertainment and animal companionship. Native Charging Thunder poses with his dog in a glass negative photograph circa 1900. The image documents Native American portraiture and family bonds. It preserves indigenous cultural practices and pet relationships. Charlie Chaplin promotes the sale of Liberty bonds on Wall Street in 1918 for the war effort. The New York Tribune headline reads, "20,000 throng Wall Street to hear movie stars tell how to win war." The photograph documents celebrity wartime fundraising. Mel Brooks stands in 1944 as the great Nazi killer himself during wartime. The photograph captures the entertainer during World War II service. It documents his military involvement before comedic fame. Pacific War veteran Howard Ald, aged 25, sits between two cops shortly after his arrest for murder in New Jersey in 1945. He beat and raped a waitress who spurned his advances at a VJ Day party. He left her to die. Helene Dutrieu stands on her aircraft on September 26, 1911, as a Belgian cycling world champion and pioneer pilot. She was a stunt cyclist, motorcyclist, automobile racer, stunt driver, ambulance driver, and hospital director. The photograph documents her extraordinary multi-talent career. A photograph shows many famous people with lesser-known figure Alexis Lager, second row on the right. 20 years later, Lager would win the Nobel Prize in Literature. The image captures an important literary figure before recognition. Alfred Hitchcock and Janet Leigh stand on the set of Psycho in 1960 during production. The photograph documents director and actress collaboration. It captures the making of a horror film classic. Joseph Kudelka photographs Easter religious celebrations near Colassano, Sicily in 1993, documenting spiritual traditions. The image captures religious observance and community ritual. It preserves cultural and religious heritage practices. James Dean stands at his trailer on the set of Giant near Marfa, Texas in 1955. The photograph captures the actor between scenes. It documents film production and the star's on-set presence. Pennsylvania politician R. Bud Dwyer shot and killed himself at a press conference on live national television on this day in 1987. He had been implicated in bribery allegations. He was due in court the next day. A River Nile gunboat operates in action on September 2, 1898 in the Sudanese War. The photograph documents naval military operations. It records river warfare and British imperial military campaigns. Two friends pose with 1970s attitude in an orphan photograph rescued from obscurity. The image captures period fashion and youthful culture. It documents the aesthetic of the decade. Suffragettes in London hold a New Zealand sign after New Zealand granted women voting rights before the 1893 election. This occurred a generation sooner than the UK or US. The photograph documents the women's suffrage movement. Italian partisans participate in the general uprising in Nazi-occupied Milan on April 26, 1945. The photograph captures resistance fighters and liberation movement. It documents the Italian campaign's final stages. Ottoman Sultan Abdulhamid II takes his last ride through the streets of Istanbul after his deposition in 1909. The photograph captures the fallen sultan's public departure. It records the end of his reign and authority. Triced soldiers of the 1st Battery of a Heavy Howitzer Regiment stand on the Eastern Front. The photograph documents artillery military personnel. It records frontline military forces during First World War operations. Black tourists and professional travelers are photographed during the golden age of travel era. The image documents African American leisure and tourism. It preserves cultural history of Black travel experiences. A 1983 photograph shows the Eric Don post-production of Phantom of the Opera theatrical performance. The image captures theatrical production and entertainment. It documents stage performance and costume design. On January 21, 1954, the first nuclear-powered submarine USS Nautilus is launched in Groton, Connecticut. Mae Eisenhower, First Lady of the United States, performs the launch ceremony. The photograph documents revolutionary naval military technology. Franklin D. Roosevelt and King Farouk I of Egypt meet at Great Bitter Lake in Ismailia, Egypt in 1945. The photograph documents diplomatic meeting between leaders. It records Allied wartime negotiations and international relations. Polish resistance soldiers stand during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944 fighting Nazi occupation. The photograph documents insurgent forces and urban warfare. It records Polish liberation struggle and resistance movements. A Soviet general or observation balloon is photographed during wartime operations. The image documents Soviet military equipment and technology. It records reconnaissance and observational capabilities. Mississippi John Hurt and Skip James are photographed at Newport Folk Festival in 1964 by Dick Waterman. The photograph captures blues musicians and folk music tradition. It documents the folk revival and American musical heritage. The crew of M3 Lee W309576 displays 75mm ammo from their M2 gun on November 24, 1942 in Tunisia. The photograph captures armor forces during the race to cut off Axis forces. It documents tank crew operations and military equipment. Paul Mantz flies his Bell 47B helicopter in 1947 as a legendary Hollywood stuntman, air racer, and early helicopter developer. The photograph documents aviation pioneer and helicopter history. It records early rotorcraft development and aviation achievement. New Zealand politician Joseph George Ward smokes a cigar with a Maori soldier of the Pioneer Battalion on June 30, 1918. The photograph was taken in France by Henry Armitage Sanders during World War I. It documents military service and colonial relationships. Three girls stroll past two British soldiers keeping watch for snipers after rioting in Belfast, Northern Ireland in 1981. The photograph captures civil conflict and military occupation. It documents sectarian violence and urban security operations. Ray Charles poses with young Stevie Wonder in Albany, Georgia in 1960 during musical career. The photograph captures two musical legends together. It documents the meeting of accomplished musicians from different generations. Captured Japanese aircraft sit on the deck of American escort carrier USS Barnes CVE-20 during transport to America in 1945. A Mitsubishi Kai-46 reconnaissance aircraft and Kyushu Q-1W Tokai anti-submarine patrol aircraft are visible. The photograph documents captured military equipment. Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989. He was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, and murdered dozens of young women between 1974 and 1978. The photograph documents criminal justice proceedings. A view of a Tokyo neighborhood shows houses burned down as a result of American air raid in 1944. The photograph documents urban destruction and war damage. It records the civilian impact of strategic bombing campaigns. GIs of the 8th Infantry Regiment 4th Infantry Division take a break near Bettendorf, Luxembourg on January 21, 1945. The soldiers rest after several days of fierce fighting during the Ardennes offensive. The photograph documents combat exhaustion and relief. The Junevix PA-1 Austro-Hungarian armored car is displayed in military equipment photograph. The image documents military vehicle technology. It records Austro-Hungarian motorized forces during the First World War. The session of the Brazilian Senate that abolished slavery is photographed in May 1888, documenting historical legislation. The photograph records the parliamentary vote ending slavery. It documents Brazilian abolition and legislative history. Italians use Nebelwerfer 41 rocket launchers in Russia on January 22, 1942, during military operations. The photograph documents artillery equipment and Italian forces. It records German-Italian military cooperation on the Eastern Front. Colonel Charles Alvin Beckwith, known as Chargin' Charlie, was not remembered for medals but for seeing deadly weakness. He refused to ignore it and believed courage alone was never enough. Preparation was everything in his military philosophy. Raimondo Vianello, Italian actor and television host, serves as a bersagliere in the RSI during military service. The photograph documents his military career. It records the entertainer's wartime military involvement. Civilian refugees somewhere in East Prussia flee in 1945 during Soviet military advancement. The photograph documents displacement and refugee crisis. It records civilian suffering during wartime conflict. While American black people were treated as slaves, Ottoman Muslim Air Forces member Ahmet Ali Effendi was the first black pilot. He participated in numerous air missions and died in 1969. The photograph documents aviation achievement and cultural history. Arditi of the 1st Forlì Storm Battalion stand in formation during 1944-1945 combat operations. The photograph documents Italian assault troops. It records elite military units during late war period. A shaving place of an Austro-Hungarian battalion is documented in military camp photograph. The image captures soldier hygiene and camp routines. It documents everyday military life during warfare. A person takes aim at a Palestinian woman protesting Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza in 1988. The photograph documents political violence and conflict. It records the Palestinian resistance movement. Wang Xiping, born 1973, was a Chinese Muslim master of Chinese martial arts following Hanafi jurisprudence. He won fights against Russian, American, German, and Japanese martial artists. The photograph documents martial arts achievement and cultural exchange. General Wool and staff pose in the Cal Real Saltillo, Mexico in 1847 during the Mexican-American War. The United States would annex vast Mexican territory comprising California, Texas, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and parts of other states. The photograph documents military occupation and territorial expansion. Sultan Enjoyer of Bamum receives a portrait of Kaiser Wilhelm II from German colonial officials in gratitude. The gift recognized his military support in the German campaign against the Banso people. The photograph documents colonial relationships and diplomacy. Soviet forces stand in Nesterov-Eben Road, Stalopernen in 1945 during military advancement in East Prussia. The photograph documents Soviet military operations. It records Eastern Front progress during the war's final stages. An unidentified 13-year-old sharecropper is photographed in Americus, Georgia in 1937 among his neighbors. Future President Jimmy Carter was born in 1924. The photograph documents agricultural labor and rural poverty during the Depression. Officers of the 114th Pennsylvania Infantry play cards in front of tents in Petersburg, Virginia on April 3, 1865. The photograph captures soldiers during the Civil War's final days. It documents military leisure and camp life. Nestor Makhno, Ukrainian anarchist revolutionary and commander of the Revolutionary Insurgent Army, stands with his lieutenants in 1919. The photograph documents anarchist leadership and military organization. It records Ukrainian resistance to Bolshevik authority. Members of the Hatfield clan pose outside a cabin in West Virginia in 1897 during their feuding era. The photograph documents the famous family. It records Appalachian family history and mountain culture. A distant view of old Kandahar, Afghanistan is photographed circa 1840 during early photography period. The image captures Afghan urban landscape and architecture. It documents historical Afghan settlement and colonial-era observation. Soldiers of the Royal Afghan Army stand in formation in 1933 during military service. The photograph documents Afghan military forces and uniforms. It records Middle Eastern military organization and structure. The Universal City Studios float at the 1969 Rose Parade takes home the grand prize trophy. The float features a proscenium-style stage with moving panels showcasing scenes from classic Universal Pictures films. The photograph documents carnival celebration and entertainment. To Bull Elk pulls a carriage led by notorious gambler Prairie Dog O'Brien in Colorado in 1894. The photograph documents unusual animal harnessing and entertainment. It records frontier humor and creative animal use. Abandoned German military equipment sits somewhere near Ilawa Deutsch Eilau in 1945 after military defeat. The photograph documents captured and destroyed equipment. It records the aftermath of military operations. Volunteers from Waziristan served during the Indo-Pak War of 1965, not to be confused with 1948's war. The photograph documents military volunteers and South Asian conflict. It records soldier participation in regional warfare. The entrance to the village of Stebark-Tannenberg is photographed in 1945 with symbolic significance. This represented symbolic revenge for Tannenberg 1914, which was revenge for Grunwald Tannenberg 1410. The photograph documents a tangled history. On January 24, 1922, Heinrich Jadamski, later Heinrich Gode, a Masurian U-boat commander, was born. He was born in Karolinka Karolinenhof near Wielbach-Willenberg. The photograph documents military service and biographical record. A young lady poses with a Lawson motorcycle or motorized bike brand new circa 1897. The photograph documents early motorcycle technology and adoption. It records the emergence of motorized transportation. Three Turkish soldiers stand during their service in the 1950s in military uniform. The photograph documents Turkish armed forces. It records military personnel and service tradition. Austro-Hungarians stand on the West Front during World War I military operations and combat. The photograph documents Austro-Hungarian forces in Western Theatre. It records Central Powers military personnel and POW. Sishaninga. Turkish and Arab troops of the Ottoman Caliphate pray together at the Sinai Front during World War I. The photograph documents religious observance and military cooperation. It records Ottoman forces and Islamic practice. U.S. Marine Corps Vought F-4U-1 Corsairs of VMF-123 sit on the ground ready to taxi onto the runway. The aircraft answer call to scramble for launch from Russell Islands on September 7, 1943. The photograph documents fighter aircraft and military readiness. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian throne, poses with Sir Mahbub Ali Khan Pasha, the 6th Nawab of Hyderabad. Franz Ferdinand died 1914 and Khan Pasha died 1911. The photograph documents royal and diplomatic relationships. Soviet forces stand in Olsztynek-Hohenstein in 1945 during military operations with burned buildings visible. The photograph documents Soviet advancement and urban destruction. It records the Eastern Front's final stages. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson watches a live Eurovision broadcast from Paris in 1962. The photograph documents vice presidential activities and international television. It records early television broadcasting and political observation. Musicians and a dog pose on State Street near Figueroa Street on a sunny day in Santa Barbara, California in 1886. The photograph captures street performance and leisure culture. It documents late 19th century entertainment. During the Battle of the Bulge, soldiers of the 106th Infantry Division prepare their 105mm howitzer for action in January 1945. The soldiers hope to stem the German tide through the Ardennes forest. The photograph documents artillery preparation and defensive operations. King Faisal of Saudi Arabia poses with the Grand Mufti of Palestine Amin al-Husseini, who died in 1974. Faisal died in 1975. The photograph documents Middle Eastern leadership and diplomatic relationships. In January 1945, Privates John Minczuk and Luther Jack of the 87th Infantry Division man a machine gun. They protect a 3rd Army Command post near the front lines in St. Hubert Forest, Belgium. The photograph documents infantry operations and defensive positions. King Carol II of Romania takes an oath in front of Parliament on June 8, 1930. The photograph documents royal governmental authority. It records Romanian constitutional and political procedures. Bahraini soldiers participate in the Arab-Israeli War in 1948 carrying a banner in Arabic script. The banner reads, "In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. We Bahrains sacrifice ourselves for Palestine Arabs and all Muslims." The photograph documents Arab military solidarity. photograph shows Bangladeshi volunteers fighting alongside Palestinians in Beirut, Lebanon in 1981. The photograph documents international solidarity and military support. It records cross-national military cooperation. Some soldiers pose photographed near a large-caliber bombshell shell during military operations. The image documents artillery, ordnance, and military personnel. It records weapons and soldier positioning. Musicians stand on State Street near Figueroa Street in Santa Barbara, California in 1886. The photograph captures performance culture and street entertainment. It documents late 19th century musical traditions. A zombie makeup comparison shows transformation between 2012 and 2025, demonstrating 25-year evolution. The photograph documents artistic makeup application and special effects development. It records the improvement of prosthetic and makeup artistry. The flying ace Lieutenant Joseph Kiss stands in military photograph as an accomplished aviator. The photograph documents Hungarian Air Force personnel. It records World War I aviation history. A glass negative shows a toddler posing with a cookie circa 1890s in domestic setting. The photograph documents childhood portraiture and Victorian family customs. It preserves early photographic practices and child documentation. The Chachapoya culture of Peru is documented by Cheryl Spa, PhD, OAS Research Associate in Scholarly Study. The photograph captures archaeological and cultural research. It documents indigenous South American civilization study. A moment of rest is captured in the Dolomites, showing soldiers resting during military operations. The photograph documents soldier relaxation and alpine terrain. It records wartime respite in mountainous region. A great-grandfather was shot and left for dead in 1943 during wartime. A fellow soldier dragged him to a dressing station, saving his life. They reunited circa 1950, resulting in the photographer's existence and familial legacy. Female Presbyterian missionary Annie Henry seated right and fellow missionary sister Isabel Center back meet Tuho tribe members in Ruatahuna, New Zealand in 1932. The tribe's chief Tohara is seated center with several wearing traditional cloaks. The photograph documents missionary work and indigene. Us encounter. A captured 280mm Italian mortar sits in the Borcola Pass during military operations. The photograph documents captured equipment and military hardware. It records artillery acquisition and warfare. A machine gunner stands in Basingstoke in 1915 during World War I service. The photograph documents frontline military personnel and weapons. It records infantrymen with heavy firepower equipment. A damaged German Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft sits following a raid on the Donskoy Gross Derschheim airfield in 1945. The photograph documents wartime aerial bombardment and aircraft destruction. It records the aftermath of military air operations. On January 20, 1914, a school for naval air training opens in Pensacola, Florida. The photograph documents aviation education and military training facility establishment. It records the beginning of American naval aviation instruction. An abandoned and knocked out former Kuwaiti M84 main battle tank from the 2nd Al-Medina Armored Division sits during the US-led invasion of Iraq circa March-May 2003. The photograph documents destroyed military equipment. It records the Iraq War's equipment losses and casualties. A group of soldiers from the Austro-Hungarian Infanteria Regiment, Erzsog Rainer NR 59 pose for a military photograph. The regiment served the Austro-Hungarian Empire in World War I. The photograph documents military personnel and unit organization. A Belgian soldier stands with a concealed artillery piece in 1915 during World War I operations. The photograph documents camouflaged military equipment. It records First World War defensive and offensive tactics. Volksturm soldiers take an oath in Schittno-Ortelsburg in late autumn 1944 during final war stages. The photograph documents Home Guard militia and Nazi recruitment. It records German civilian military mobilization. On January 20, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt is sworn in for an unprecedented fourth term as U.S. President. No president before or after has served 4 terms in office. The photograph documents constitutional history and presidential authority. Black Sabbath members Ronnie James Dio and Tony Iommi stand backstage together in 1982 during touring. The photograph captures rock musicians and band collaboration. It documents heavy metal music and performance culture. Franciscan friars stand at their friary in Campbelltown, New South Wales, Australia in 1936. The photograph documents religious community and monastic life. It records Catholic religious practice in Australia. On January 20, 1949, the first inaugural parade televised for Harry Truman is watched by 10 million people. The photograph documents presidential ceremony and television broadcasting. It records the beginning of televised presidential events. A position of a Bosnian-Herzegovinian regiment sits in East Galicia during military campaign. The photograph documents Austro-Hungarian forces and regional positioning. It records First World War battlefield locations.